Clara stood on a sidewalk in New York City and felt very small. The buildings around her were huge, like tall stone trees. She held an old brown suitcase tied with a rope. Her boots were still dirty from the red dirt on her family's farm in rural Washington state. Rain started to fall. The air felt cold and gray, but Clara stayed where she was. She looked up at the tallest building she had ever seen. It was made of glass and looked like it touched the clouds. This was where Alexander lived. Alexander was very rich. People said he was a billionaire. To Clara, that meant he lived in a world she didn't understand at all. Her grandmother had sent her here because their small farm had failed. They lost everything. There was no one else who could take care of Clara. She took a deep breath. The air smelled like cars and strong perfume. It made her miss the smell of rain, grass, and hay back home. With her heart beating fast, she walked toward the big gold doors of the building. She felt scared, like a trapped rabbit. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew her life was about to change. The doors were opened by a man wearing a suit. He looked at Clara like she didn't belong there. He didn't speak. His eyes went straight to her muddy boots as she walked inside. The floor was white marble and very shiny, like ice. Clara felt small and uncomfortable. Her denim jacket and simple flower dress looked cheap in this place full of gold and clean walls. She was taken to a private elevator. It moved very fast and made her ears pop. When the doors opened, she stepped into a room so big it was larger than her whole house back home. The walls were covered with paintings full of colors she didn't understand. The furniture was dark and heavy and smelled like old wood. Everything felt expensive and serious. In the middle of the room, by a huge window, stood Alexander. He was looking out at the city. He didn't turn around right away. His back was to her. His shoulders were wide, and his suit looked like it cost more money than her grandmother's tractor. When he finally turned around, his eyes were dark blue, like the ocean before a storm, cold, serious, and sharp. He did not smile. He did not say hello. He just stared at her. Clara felt a chill run down her back, and it was not from the rain. He walked toward her slowly and calmly. He stopped very close. She could smell something clean and expensive, like wood smoke and mint. He reached out and touched the old strap on her backpack. Then he sighed, long and bored. He told her he did not have time for a girl with dirt under her fingernails. He said New York was for winners, and she looked like someone who had already lost. Clara's face burned. Her grandmother always said her temper would get her in trouble, but Clara did not look down. She looked straight into his eyes. She told him that back in rural Washington state, people were taught to have manners, even rich men. She said someone who lived in a glass house should not look down on people who worked hard. Alexander froze. No one talked to him like that. People were usually scared of him, but this girl stood in his home smelling like the outdoors and called him rude. His chest tightened in surprise. He leaned closer. His face was very near hers. He whispered that she had made a big mistake. He said this city was his, and she was only a guest who could be thrown back into the rain at any time. Clara did not flinch. She said she would rather sleep in the rain than stay with a man who had a cold heart. She turned to leave, her suitcase hitting her leg. Alexander grabbed her arm. His grip was strong, but not painful. His hand was warm. He said she was not leaving. He said his grandmother would never forgive him if he let her go. but if she stayed, she had to follow his rules. He called his head maid, a tall woman named Martha. He told her to take Clara to the smallest room in the back. He told her to throw away Clara's clothes and buy new ones that looked better. Clara's face burned in tears, but she did not cry. She told Alexander he could take her clothes, but he could never take who she was. She followed Martha down a long, quiet hallway. She could feel Alexander watching her. She did not know he was still standing there, thinking. He had planned to ignore her until she left. Now he wanted to see how strong she really was. And that was only the beginning. Clara was taken to a room that was small for a billionaire, but still more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. The bed had silk sheets that felt cool and smooth, and the window showed the city lights twinkling like tiny stars. Martha told her to take a shower and put on the silk robe that was on the bed. When Clara was alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and let out a shaky breath. It felt like she was in a movie, but the hero was a man who didn't like her. She pulled a small, wrinkled photo from her pocket. It was a picture of her mother, a woman with a smile that could light up a room. Her mother had died long ago in a fire that destroyed their old house, and Clara had been the only one to survive. She whispered to the photo that she would stay strong, just like her mother had taught her. But the night felt heavy and quiet in the Sky Mansion. She could hear the city far below, and Alexander's footsteps in the hallway. He didn't know the truth yet. He didn't know Clara wasn't just some random girl from a farm. He didn't know her mother's name had been Serena Thorne, a name that used to mean power in this city. Clara was the last of the Thornes. Her family had been destroyed by people Alexander probably knew. She wasn't here just because the farm was gone. She was here to find the truth about the fire, and she knew the answers were hidden somewhere in the glass offices of New York. The next morning, the sun hit the glass buildings and filled Clara's room with bright light. She was woken by loud knocking on the door. It wasn't Alexander, but a woman she had never seen before. The woman was tall, with blonde hair pulled back tight, and she wore a red dress that looked like blood. This was Abigail, Alexander's business partner and the woman who wanted to be his wife. Abigail didn't wait for Clara to answer. She just walked in and looked around the room with disgust. She poked Clara's suitcase with her long red nails and laughed, sharp and mean. She said Alexander only liked the best, and Clara was the worst. She told Clara she would never fit in his world. Clara sat up in bed, the silk sheets wrapped around her, feeling that spark of fire in her chest. She said that if Alexander only liked the best, it was strange that he spent so much time with her. Abigail's smile disappeared, and her eyes narrowed. She stepped closer and warned Clara to stay away from Alexander. She said the city would eat a girl from the country alive. She told Clara that Alexander was taking her to a big party at the Metropolitan Museum tonight, and Clara should stay in her room and wait for scraps from dinner. Clara said nothing, but watched Abigail leave, her high heels clicking on the floor like a ticking clock. She realized she was in a war she didn't know how to fight. These people used words like weapons and money like shields. She got out of bed and looked in the big mirror. Her skin was tanned from the sun, her brown curls were messy, and her eyes were wide with fear and bravery. The silk robe Alexander had bought her was pale pink and soft. It made her look different. She decided then that she wouldn't hide. If Alexander wanted a game, she would play it. Clara walked to the main living area. Alexander was sitting at a long table, drinking coffee and looking at a tablet. He looked up as she entered, his eyes moving from her face to the pink robe. He noticed how it made her skin glow and felt a tight feeling in his throat. He cleared his voice and told her to sit. He said he had a meeting all day, but he had arranged for a stylist to come and fix her. He said she couldn't walk around his sky mansion looking like a ghost. Clara sat down across from him, the silence between them feeling heavy. She asked why he was doing all this. Did he feel sorry for her? Alexander put down his coffee, the sound loud in the quiet room. He said he didn't feel sorry for anyone. He said he wanted things perfect, and right now she was a flaw in his perfect life. He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. He said that tonight she was going to the party with him. Abigail was wrong. He wasn't taking her. He was taking Clara. He wanted to see how the city would react to a girl from the country, and if she would break under pressure. Clara felt her heart jump. She knew it was a trap. He wanted to humiliate her and show she didn't belong in his golden glass world. But she also knew this was her chance to get closer to people who knew about the Thorne family. She looked him in the eyes and said she would go. She wasn't afraid of his world, and she wasn't afraid of him. Alexander smiled, a small, dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said he liked her spirit, but warned that by the end of the night she would be begging to go back to rural Washington state. What she did at that party would change everything. He stood up and left, and Clara looked out at the shining city. She felt a sense of destiny. The country girl was about to enter the lion's den, and she was going to make sure everyone remembered her name. As the day went on, the Sky Mansion was full of people. Stylists, makeup artists, and hairdressers all worked on Clara, looking at her like she was a project. They washed her hair with soap that smelled like roses and painted her nails a sunset color. Then they brought out a dress that made Clara catch her breath. It was dark green, like the woods back home after rain. The velvet felt soft, like a hug, and tiny gold crystals sparkled on the sleeves. When Clara looked in the mirror, she didn't see the country girl anymore. She saw a woman who could belong in a palace. She saw a Thorne. Alexander waited for her at the elevator as the sun began to set. He wore a black tuxedo that made him look even stronger and more handsome. When the doors opened, he looked at her, his usual cold stare gone. His mouth was slightly open as Clara walked toward him. He didn't see flaws. He saw a queen. He took her hand, his fingers brushing the gold crystals on her sleeve. He whispered that she looked different. Clara smiled a small, confident smile. "I'm just getting started," she said. Alexander led her into the elevator. He didn't let go of her hand. He didn't know yet that the girl he was trying to control was the only one who could really challenge him. As they stepped out into the cool night air and walked to the limousine, he felt a strange pride. He was bringing the country girl to the heart of New York, and he knew nothing would ever be the same. The tension was rising, and the city was about to see the first spark of a fire that could change everything. But the real danger was waiting at the party, and Alexander didn't even know it yet.
If you're finding this story interesting, please consider subscribing to our channel. It's completely free and really helps support us as a small channel trying to grow. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to the video.
The flash of 1,000 cameras made Clara blink, but she didn't look away. Even when the richest people in New York whispered that the country girl was a fake, she stayed strong. She felt Alexander's hand on her back. It was warm, like a shield against the cold city. They walked into the museum for the big party. The music was soft, and the air smelled like flowers and champagne. Everyone stopped talking when they saw Clara in her dark green velvet dress. They expected a girl with dirty hands, but they saw a woman who looked like she belonged in the spotlight. And this was just the beginning of how Clara turned this scary night into her victory. Abigail stood by the entrance, her face full of anger as she watched Alexander walk Clara through the crowd. Abigail had a plan to make sure Clara never came back to New York. She had put a diamond necklace in Clara's purse earlier, and she was waiting for the right moment to call the police and say Clara stole it. Clara felt the whispers following her like a bad smell. People called her a stray and a nobody, but she held her head high and kept walking like she owned the floor. When they reached the middle of the room, Abigail stepped forward and pointed at Clara's small velvet bag. She shouted for everyone to hear that her favorite necklace was missing and that Clara must have taken it. The room went quiet. Clara's heart pounded like a trapped bird. Alexander's face turned cold as ice as the security guards moved closer. Abigail pulled the shining diamonds out of Clara's bag like a trophy. She told Alexander that he had brought a criminal into their world and that Clara should go to jail. But Clara didn't cry. She didn't even look scared. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She showed a video she had secretly taken. Earlier that day, she saw Abigail sneaking near her room and had left her phone recording. The video showed Abigail going into Clara's room and putting the necklace in her bag. The crowd gasped louder than the music. Alexander didn't wait for Abigail to explain. He told the guards to remove her from the museum and never let her back in. He turned to Clara and finally saw her differently. Not just a country girl, but someone smart and brave, smarter than everyone else in the room. But the danger was not over. Abigail's father, Edward, was watching from the shadows. He was even richer and meaner than Abigail. He was from Washington, D.C., and had built his power by destroying families. He knew the Thorn name, and that if Clara stayed alive and claimed her family's power, his empire could fall. Alexander saw Edward's men moving toward the doors. He realized Clara couldn't fight this alone. He grabbed her hand and led her to a quiet balcony overlooking the dark trees of the park. He told Clara that Edward would never stop until she was gone. The only way to keep her safe from the law and from Edward's men was to make her part of his family. He said that tomorrow morning they would be married. It wasn't a choice. He said it was the only way to keep her alive. Clara was shocked. She told him she didn't love him and she didn't want to be a trophy for a billionaire. Alexander leaned close, his eyes full of a mix of fear and a need to protect her. He said that as his wife, no one could hurt her. He promised to give her everything: fast cars, beautiful jewelry, and a rich life. But she had to stay by his side. Clara realized she had been pulled into a life she never asked for. But she also saw a chance for revenge. Alexander didn't know yet that Clara was already planning her first day at the city's most elite university. She would find the proof she needed to take down Edward once and for all. The next morning, Clara woke up with a heavy gold ring on her finger and a strong feeling in her heart. Alexander had already sent a line of black cars to take her to the university in Washington, the school where the children of the richest and most powerful people in America went. That morning he spoiled her buying her new designer clothes and a soft leather backpack. He told her that now she was like a queen and should act like the world belonged to her. When Clara walked onto the campus, the other students stared at her like she didn't belong there. They had already heard about her sudden marriage to the billionaire Alexander, and many of them were ready to be cruel to her. They thought she was just a lucky country girl who married rich. They didn't know she was Serena Thorne's daughter. Clara held onto her bag straps and kept walking to her first class. She ignored the girls who tried to trip her in the hallway. She wasn't the scared farm girl anymore. She was Alexander's wife now, and she was a Thorne who wanted justice. Clara walked into the classroom and saw Abigail sitting in the front row. Abigail's eyes were red from crying. She leaned close to her friends and whispered that the university was her place and that Clara would never leave it alive. Clara did not react. She sat down and opened her book. Her mind was already working ahead of everyone else. The professor started teaching in hard French. Then he switched to German. He asked the class if anyone could translate a difficult law paper. No one spoke. The rich students stared at their desks. Clara raised her hand. She answered every question clearly and without fear. She spoke perfect French and perfect German. These were languages her mother had taught her in secret back on the farm. The class was shocked. Even the professor looked amazed. Clara understood something important. Her knowledge was her strongest weapon in this dangerous place. After class, as she walked to her locker, she found a small note tucked into the handle. With it was an old burned photo of her mother's house on fire. On the back were the words, "Some ghosts should stay buried if they want to stay alive." Clara felt cold all over. Edward was watching her. A moment later, Alexander came up behind her and placed his hand on her shoulder. He saw the note and his face filled with anger. He promised to spend all the money needed to protect her. He said she would have bodyguards, a private driver, and guards with her in every class. But Clara knew the fight was only beginning. Only she could finish it. She looked at the gold ring on her finger. Then she looked at Alexander. She saw that he was starting to care more than he wanted to admit. Alexander took her to a private lunch in a garden closed just for them. He gave her a small box. Inside was a key to a house by the ocean in California. He said they would go there after the school year. He was trying to buy her safety and peace. Clara shook her head. She told him she didn't want a house. She wanted the names of the men who were with Edward the night of the fire. Alexander's face grew dark. He warned her to be careful. Once they searched the past, there would be no turning back. He said he would help her, but only if he handled the danger. What happened that night would change everything between them. They went back to the Sky Mansion. When Clara entered her room, she saw even more gifts. There were jewels shining like stars, and shoes that cost more than her grandmother's whole farm. Alexander was trying to cover her in money so she would stay quiet, but Clara's mind was somewhere else. She was thinking about the secret safe she heard was hidden in the basement. She knew what was inside that safe. A list. A list of every person who helped Edward destroy the Thorne family. She waited until Alexander was asleep. Her heart was beating fast as she quietly walked down the stairs. She knew that if she got caught, things would get very bad. She reached the big steel door of the safe. Just as she was about to touch it, the lights turned on. Alexander was standing there. His arms were crossed. His face looked calm, but very disappointed. He told her he already knew she was a thorn. He said he knew why she really came here. But he didn't know the full truth yet. He didn't know that the person who helped Edward start the fire was someone from his own family. Alexander stood in the dark hallway like a shadow. The basement felt so cold it made Clara's heart hurt. He didn't look like the man who had bought her silk dresses. He looked like a king guarding a dark secret. He walked toward her, his eyes glowing in the dim light. Clara knew the game between them was about to get much more dangerous. Her fingers shook as she stepped away from the heavy steel safe. She thought Alexander would yell or throw her out of the Sky Mansion. But he didn't. He walked past her and put his hand on the cold metal door. With a few clicks, the safe opened. Inside were old papers and a small wooden box that smelled like burnt wood. Alexander took out a yellowed folder. He looked at Clara and said he had been waiting for her to ask. He told her he didn't want to hide the truth, but he was afraid it might hurt her. Clara opened the folder. Her mother's handwriting was on the first page. Tears filled her eyes. She read the names. There was Edward, the man who tried to ruin her at the museum, and next to his name was Thomas Sterling, Alexander's uncle who had died years ago. Clara felt like the floor was falling under her. The people she was living with had helped destroy her family. She looked at Alexander, eyes full of pain and shock. She asked if he knew his family had helped Edward ruin the Thorns. Alexander didn't look away. He said he only found out a few months ago. That was why he took her in. He wanted to make it right. He said he would use his money to give her back the life his uncle had helped steal. Clara didn't know if she could trust him, but when he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, she felt a strange warmth. He said they were leaving New York. They were going to the District of Columbia for a big meeting with the most powerful people in the city. He said it was time for the world to see that a thorn was back. The next morning, Alexander started spoiling Clara like she was in a dream. He didn't just buy her clothes. He bought her a whole old library in Massachusetts that used to belong to her great-grandfather. He told her every book and every stone in the building was hers now. He said he wanted her to have something that no one could ever destroy. They got on a private jet to Washington. Alexander sat next to her and showed her how to read complicated business maps. He treated her like a partner, not a simple girl from a farm. He noticed how smart she was and how carefully she looked at details. He felt proud of her. He gave her a diamond bracelet. It was beautiful, but he whispered it also had a hidden camera and a GPS tracker. He said it was her gift, but also her lifeline. In Washington, the enemies wouldn't use weapons. They would use laws and lies. But this was only the start of the trap. When they arrived in Washington, they stayed in a massive estate that overlooked the Potomac River. The house was filled with servants who bowed as Clara walked by, calling her Mrs. Sterling. Clara felt a heavy weight on her shoulders, but Alexander was always there, his hand on her back, guiding her through the halls. He took her to a famous department store and told the manager to close the doors to the public. He sat in a velvet chair while a parade of models showed Clara the finest outfits in the world. He bought her everything. shoes made of Italian leather, coats made of the softest wool, and bags that cost more than a city bus. He was trying to drown her in luxury so she wouldn't feel the fear creeping up her spine. He told her that tonight there was a gala at the National Portrait Gallery, and Edward would be there. He said it was time for Clara to look her enemy in the eye. Clara spent the afternoon getting ready, her heart racing faster with every minute. She picked a dress that was dark like midnight, with tiny silver stars that sparkled when she moved. When she walked down the big staircase, Alexander stopped talking to his assistant. He stared at her like she was the only person in the world. He told her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and he really meant it. He led her to a black car. As they drove through the streets of Washington, he held her hand tight. He said no matter what happened at the gala, he would never let go. He didn't know the truth yet. Edward had already hired someone to ruin the car they were in. The woman whispered one word to Clara: "Run." Before Clara could ask why, the lights in the gallery went out. A loud crash shook the room, and smoke filled the air. People started screaming and running for the doors. Suddenly, rough hands grabbed Clara from behind. A cloth was pressed over her mouth. It smelled sweet, and her head started spinning. She tried to reach for the diamond bracelet Alexander had given her, but her arms felt too heavy. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Edward's cold, smiling face. Alexander didn't wait. He moved through the dark like a predator, his eyes searching for where Clara had disappeared. He didn't call the police. He called his security team and told them to lock down every exit in the city. He knew Edward had planned this, using the gala as a trap. Alexander went to the spot where Clara had been standing and found a single silver star from her dress on the floor. He gripped it so hard his palm cut and blood dripped onto the stone. He whispered that Edward had just started a war he would never finish. But he didn't know the truth yet. The woman in the veil was the key, and she was already taking Clara to a secret basement under the city. Clara awoke in a cold, damp room. Her hands were tied with thick rope. She looked up and saw the woman in the veil. When the black lace was pulled back, Clara let out a silent scream. It was her aunt, the sister of her mother, someone she thought had died in the fire 15 years ago. Her aunt told her the fire wasn't just about money, it was about a secret her mother had hidden in a safe in Washington. Edward wanted the secret because it would prove he had stolen his empire. Her aunt said Clara had to find the secret before Alexander, or he would be in danger too. Clara realized her marriage wasn't just protection, it was a target. She heard Edward's heavy boots in the hallway. She whispered to her aunt to hide. The door swung open, and Edward walked in, his shadow long and scary. He said Alexander couldn't find her, and that tonight the Thorn name would be erased. But Clara didn't freeze. She looked at Edward and smiled, cold and brave. She told him he was wrong. She said she wasn't a scared girl from a farm anymore. She said the diamond bracelet on her wrist had already sent her location to Alexander, and he was already outside. Edward looked at her wrist and saw the tiny red light glowing. He cursed and reached for his gun, but at that moment, the basement wall exploded in a cloud of dust and fire. Alexander walked through the smoke with a gun in each hand. His face was hard and angry. He didn't look like a rich CEO anymore. He looked like a man who would do anything to save her. Dust filled the room as Alexander stepped through the broken wall. His eyes moved fast until he saw Clara tied to a chair. When he saw her like that, a deep, angry sound came from his chest. He cut the ropes quickly and caught her before she fell. He didn't care about the men on the floor. He only looked at Clara. He gently touched the red marks on her wrists, his hands careful and soft. Clara's chest hurt when she felt how much he cared. He pulled her close, holding her tight. She could feel his heart beating fast and strong, like it was saying, "You're safe now." He didn't speak. He just picked her up and carried her away, her dark dress moving around them as they walked out of the smoke. This was only the beginning of what they would do next. Alexander walked through the smoke with a gun in each hand. His face was hard and angry. He didn't look like a rich CEO anymore. He looked like a man who would do anything to save her. Dust filled the room as Alexander stepped through the broken wall. His eyes moved fast until he saw Clara tied to a chair. When he saw her like that, a deep, angry sound came from his chest. He cut the ropes quickly and caught her before she fell. He didn't care about the men on the floor. He only looked at Clara. He gently touched the red marks on her wrists, his hands careful and soft. Clara's chest hurt when she felt how much he cared. He pulled her close, holding her tight. She could feel his heart beating fast and strong, like it was saying, "You're safe now." He didn't speak. He just picked her up and carried her away, her dark dress moving around them as they walked out of the smoke. This was only the beginning of what they would do next. He took her to a huge house in Malibu, hidden behind tall stone walls and looking out over the blue ocean waves. He called it his fortress. The house was made of glass and white stone, sitting high above the water like it was at the edge of the world. He told Clara that for the next week she didn't need to think about Edward, the fire, or the Thorn name. He said he would make her forget what being scared felt like. The house was filled with expensive things. Her bedroom was bigger than a farmhouse. Racks of new clothes filled the room, and they felt soft when she touched them. Boxes of shiny shoes sat by the windows, glowing in the California sunlight. The bathroom had a huge tub made from one solid piece of green marble. He spoiled her like he was trying to build a wall of gold around her. Every morning, a chef made breakfast with fresh fruit and sweet pastries. Alexander sat with her on the balcony while they ate, watching dolphins jump in the ocean. He told her stories about growing up in Washington State, and for the first time, she saw a softer side of him. He was calm, quiet, and gentle in a way he never showed anyone else. He bought her a car the color of the sunset and said it was hers forever. But even with all the gifts, security guards followed her everywhere, even from room to room. He was trying to protect her, but it felt like she was being watched all the time. Alexander kept giving her things because he didn't want her to notice the sadness in his eyes. He felt guilty because his uncle, Thomas Sterling, helped hurt her family. He promised her that he would use his money to buy back all the Thorn land in the country. He said that one day she would be the most powerful woman in America, and he would stand behind her, supporting her. But Clara couldn't just sit there as a spoiled wife. Her thoughts were still stuck in that basement, thinking about her Aunt Eliza and the secret her mother hid. She understood that Alexander was trying to keep her safe in a golden cage, but she knew she had to leave it and face the world herself. One afternoon, while Alexander was busy on a business call with a senator in the District of Columbia, Clara found Aunt Eliza hiding in the guest house. Her aunt looked older and very tired, but her eyes were still sharp and strong, full of the thorn fire. Eliza told Clara the truth. The secret was a small black book hidden in a safe deposit box in Seattle, Washington. That book had a list of every bribe Edward ever paid and every fire he ever started. It was proof of all his crimes. Eliza also told Clara that only a thorn could open the box. The key was special, and it was hidden inside the gold ring on Clara's finger. Clara looked down at the heavy gold ring Alexander had given her and understood everything. He hadn't just given her a ring because they were married. He had given her the key to her own power. He had known the truth the whole time and kept it safe for her. Clara felt many emotions at once. She was angry that he never told her, but deep down she also felt a strange, strong love because he had protected her future without taking it away from her. Clara went back into the main house and found Alexander in the library. He was looking at a map of New York. She walked straight up to him, held up her hand, and showed him the ring. She asked him why he never told her that the ring was the key to destroying Edward. Alexander stood up slowly. His face looked pale, and his eyes were full of fear and pain. He told her the truth. He said he was scared she would leave him once she had what she needed. He said that after opening the box, she wouldn't need a billionaire to protect her anymore. He admitted he was selfish. He wanted her to stay in his world forever. Clara touched his face gently. She saw how afraid he really was. She told him she wasn't leaving, but she also wasn't going to disappear or stay quiet. She said they were going to Seattle together. But the danger wasn't over. Abigail had not given up. After being embarrassed in New York, she went to Edward and told him she knew where Clara was hiding. She had secretly tracked Alexander's private jet and followed them to California. While Clara and Alexander planned their trip to Washington State, Abigail was already nearby, watching the estate from a boat on the ocean. She hired dangerous men who didn't care about the law. That night, thick fog rolled in from the sea. Suddenly, the security alarms stopped working. Clara was in the kitchen making tea when she saw a shadow move past the window. She didn't scream. She grabbed a heavy silver tray and stayed quiet, like she used to do on the farm. Clara was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, when she saw a shadow move past the window. She didn't scream. She grabbed a heavy silver tray and moved into the shadows, just like she used to do when she was hunting on the farm. She saw a man in black entering through the terrace, his hand reaching for a weapon. Before he could move, Clara swung the tray with all her might, hitting him so hard he fell to the floor in a heap. But then 2 more men appeared, and then 3. She realized that the fortress had been broken. Alexander came running down the stairs, his face a mask of fury. He didn't have his guns this time. He used his bare hands to fight off the attackers, his movements like a whirlwind of power. He was protecting Clara with his own body, taking a blow that was meant for her. Clara saw a drop of blood hit the white marble floor, and she felt a rage so cold it made her scream. She grabbed a heavy glass vase and threw it at the man who had hurt her husband, the glass shattering like ice. Just as it seemed they were going to be overwhelmed, the sound of sirens filled the air. Aunt Eliza had seen the men from the guest house and had called the local police. The men scrambled to escape, disappearing into the fog, but one person stayed behind. Abigail stepped out from behind a large palm tree, her face twisted with a look of pure insanity. She held a small remote in her hand and told Alexander that if he didn't give her Clara, she would blow up the house. She said that if she couldn't have Alexander, then no one could. She was ready to destroy everything they had built. Alexander stood in front of Clara, his shirt torn and his arm bleeding, and he told Abigail to do her worst. He said that a house of glass can be rebuilt, but the fire in Clara's heart could never be put out. Abigail's finger moved toward the button, her eyes wide and wild. What happened next changed the fate of the Sterling family forever. In that split second, Clara didn't wait for Abigail to act. She remembered the diamond bracelet Alexander had given her, the one with the hidden camera. She had already been recording Abigail's face and her threats, and she had sent the video directly to the New York news stations and the police in the District of Columbia. She told Abigail that the whole world was watching her right now. She said that Abigail was no longer a socialite. She was a terrorist. Abigail looked at her phone and saw her own face on the news, the headlines calling for her arrest. The remote fell from her hands as she realized that she had been defeated by a girl from the country who was 10 times smarter than her. The police moved in and took Abigail away in handcuffs, her screams echoing off the glass walls of the mansion.
Alexander collapsed onto the sofa, weak from blood loss. Clara rushed to him and tried to stop the bleeding. She cried and begged him to stay with her. He smiled softly and told her he would fight any war to keep her safe. He said tomorrow they would go to Seattle and open the box. He promised to stop keeping her locked away. As the sun rose, the house became quiet again. While helping Alexander, Clara found a paper that had fallen from Abigail's pocket. It was a bank record showing money sent from the Sterling family to Edward. Clara felt cold with fear. The money hadn't just come from Edward. It came from Alexander's father. She looked at Alexander sleeping and realized something terrible. His family was even more dangerous than she thought. She didn't know yet that Alexander's father was still alive, hiding in a mansion in Washington state, waiting for them. Clara walked to the window and looked out at the dark ocean. She knew she had to be stronger than ever. She wasn't just a wife or a country girl anymore. She was a fighter, and the worst enemy was still ahead. Clara and Alexander arrived in Seattle under a sky that was the color of lead. The rain was constant, a cold mist that made the city look like a memory. Alexander had spent the entire trip spoiling her, filling the private plane with her favorite flowers and making sure she had a new wardrobe of thick wool coats and boots that felt like butter. He was trying to protect her from the cold, but Clara knew he was also trying to protect her from the truth. She still had that piece of paper in her pocket, the one she had found in California that said Alexander's father was the one paying the killers. She looked at Alexander as he sat across from her, his face tired but beautiful, and she wondered if he was a part of the secret too. He had become her everything, the man who dragged her into marriage and then spoiled her until she forgot she was ever poor. But now she was a warrior again. They arrived at a hotel that Alexander had bought just for this trip. He didn't want any strangers near her. He had filled the lobby with his own men, all of them wearing earpieces and looking at the doors with sharp eyes. He led Clara to the top floor, where the windows showed the Space Needle poking through the clouds like a giant needle. He took her to the bedroom and showed her a bed covered in boxes from the most expensive stores in Washington state. There were jewels, perfumes, and even a small golden music box that played the song her mother used to sing. He was drowning her in luxury, trying to make her happy before the storm hit. Clara touched the golden music box and felt a tear hit her cheek. She told Alexander that she didn't need any of this. She said she only needed him to be honest. Alexander looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, dark sadness, and he promised that today they would find the truth together. The next morning, they drove to the center of the city, to a bank that looked like a fortress made of gray stone. Alexander walked in with Clara, his arm around her waist, and everyone in the bank stopped what they were doing to bow. He was the most powerful man they had ever seen, and they treated Clara like she was a goddess. They were led deep underground, past heavy doors and through hallways that smelled like old money and cold metal. Finally, they reached the safe deposit vault. Clara felt the gold ring on her finger, the key that her Aunt Eliza had told her about. Her heart was beating so loud she thought Alexander could hear it. The bank manager left them alone in a small private room with a steel box sitting on a velvet table. Alexander stepped back, giving her space, but his hand stayed on the door handle, ready to protect her from whatever was inside. Clara took a deep breath and touched the ring to the lock. There was a soft click, and the box popped open. Inside was a small black ledger and a silver locket. Clara opened the ledger and saw pages and pages of names and numbers. It was a record of every crime Edward had ever committed, but it was also a record of the Thorne family's wealth. She saw that her mother had hidden millions of dollars in accounts that only a Thorne could access. But as she flipped to the last page, she saw a name that made her heart stop. Julian Sterling. That was Alexander's father. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open. It wasn't the bank manager. It was a tall, older man with white hair and eyes that were just as blue and cold as Alexander's. This was Julian Sterling, the man everyone thought was hiding in a quiet mansion, but he was here, in the heart of Seattle. He wasn't alone. Edward was standing behind him, looking like a whipped dog. Julian looked at Clara and then at the ledger in her hand. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a king who was used to getting his way. He told Clara that she was a very persistent girl. He said that 20 years ago he had tried to help her mother, but her mother had been too stubborn to give up the Thorne Empire. He said the fire was a mistake, a plan that Edward had messed up. Edward started to speak, but Julian silenced him with a single look. Julian looked at his son Alexander and told him that he was disappointed. He said Alexander was supposed to destroy the Thorne girl, not marry her. He told Alexander that he had spent his life building the Sterling name, and he wouldn't let a country girl tear it down. Alexander stepped in front of Clara, his body a solid muscle and anger. He told his father that he was done being a puppet. He said that he had spent his life trying to make his father proud, but now he was going to make him pay. He said that Clara was his wife, and that meant she was a Sterling now, too. He told his father that every crime in that ledger was going to be sent to the police in the District of Columbia. Julian laughed, a sound that was dry and cold. He said that he owned the police and the judges. He told Alexander that they were never leaving this bank alive.
Just as he spoke, men in black suits appeared in the hallway, their weapons ready. Clara felt the fear rising in her throat. But then she remembered the diamond bracelet Alexander had given her, the one with the tracker and the camera. She realized that Alexander hadn't just been spoiling her, he had been preparing her. She looked at the bracelet and saw that it was already recording everything Julian was saying. She looked at Julian and Edward and told them that they were the ones who were trapped. She said that the entire world was watching them right now on a private stream. She had used the bank's own Wi-Fi to broadcast the meeting to the news stations in New York and California. Julian's face turned from white to a sickly gray. He realized that the country girl he looked down on had just outsmarted him using the very technology his own son had created. The men in the hallway hesitated, looking at each other as their phones began to buzz with news alerts. Alexander didn't wait. He moved like lightning, grabbing Julian and pinning him against the wall, while his own security team arrived from the secret elevators. The bank was suddenly filled with the sound of shouting and the stomping of boots. Edward tried to run, but Clara didn't let him. She used a heavy metal chair to block his path, her eyes full of the thorn fire. She told him that this was for her mother. She told him that he was no longer a CEO. He was a common criminal. They took Julian and Edward away in handcuffs, their faces hidden from the cameras that were now everywhere. Alexander turned to Clara, his face covered in sweat and his suit torn. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into a hug so tight she could feel his heart finally slowing down. He told her that it was over. He said the Thorn name was finally safe. But as they walked out of the bank and into the cold Seattle rain, Alexander stopped. He looked at Clara and told her that he had one more surprise. He took her to a giant office building in the center of the city. On the very top, in giant, glowing letters, was the name Thorn. He had bought back her family's company and merged it with his own, making her the co-CEO of the biggest empire in America. He was spoiling her with the one thing she had always wanted, her home. He told her that from now on, she wasn't just his wife, she was his equal. Clara looked up at the sign and then at her husband. She realized that the billionaire who had dragged her into marriage had ended up giving her the world. But as they entered the building to start their new life, a man in the lobby handed Clara a small black envelope. Inside was a single rose and a note that said, "The fire hasn't gone out yet." Clara looked at Alexander, and she knew that the final battle was still to come. Stay with me for the final chapter to see if Clara and Alexander can survive the ultimate revenge.
The cold wind of New York blew hard as Clara stood on top of the Thorn building. She looked down at the city lights. They looked small and bright, like tiny promises. But the black envelope in her hand felt cold and scary. She knew someone was still trying to hurt her. Alexander stood behind her, his arms around her waist. He had spent the last week spoiling her. He bought her a private island in California and filled it with flowers from rural Washington. He wanted her to feel like a queen. He also wanted her to feel safe. When he saw the note in the black envelope, his face turned dark with anger. He added more guards to protect her and the building. He promised her the past would never hurt her again. He whispered that she was his life. But Clara knew the danger wasn't over. She touched the ring on her finger and felt strong. She was not the scared girl who came to the city in the rain. She was Clara Thorne Sterling, and she was ready. The next morning was their real wedding day. The sun made the city glow pink and gold. Alexander filled the ballroom with white flowers and soft music. He bought Clara a beautiful silk dress covered in tiny pearls. He wanted this wedding to be about love, not fear. As Clara got ready, she saw someone move in the mirror. It was Abigail. She looked wild and broken. She had escaped the police and was hiding in the building. She held a small lighter, and the room smelled like gasoline. Abigail laughed and said if she couldn't have the sterling name, no one would. She said she would burn the building down with Clara inside. Clara didn't scream. She didn't run. She looked at Abigail and saw someone already destroyed by hate. She stepped forward and said fire can destroy buildings, but not the truth. Abigail screamed and lit the flame. Before she could drop it, the door burst open. Alexander rushed in. He moved fast and grabbed Abigail's hand, knocking the lighter away. His face was cold and furious. He called security, and this time, Abigail was taken away forever. Alexander turned to Clara, shaking as he checked if she was hurt. He said he was sorry. Clara touched his face and told him she saved herself too. She said they were a team. Alexander turned to Clara, shaking as he checked if she was hurt. He said he was sorry. Clara touched his face and told him she saved herself too. She said they were a team.
After the wedding, they flew to their island in California. Life became calm. They walked on the beach, watched the stars, and planned their future. Alexander still spoiled her, but more than anything, he gave her love. Clara looked at the ocean and felt peace. The fire was finally gone. She was no longer just a country girl. She was a partner, a leader, and a woman who chose her own life. Their story ended not with fear, but with love, strength, and a future they built together. If you were moved by Clara's journey from the farm to the throne, please make sure to like and subscribe for more epic stories of love and power, so you never miss a new cinematic episode of the Billionaire's world.